Omega Psi Phi Fraternity has been hit with two very serious lawsuits alleging hazing. Are they going to survive?
What's up with the dude? We all right now.
I'm a lawyer in real life. I don't play one on television. One of the lawsuits involves the death of Caleb Wilson in Louisiana at Southern University. And there is a second lawsuit that involves the hazing of a young man at the University of Southern Mississippi. We're going to dive into that lawsuit and what the complaint says, what they are alleging as facts in the complaint. So let's get into this. In this lawsuit, they are suing the university system, the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity National Organization, the Undergraduate Organization, the local alumni chapter, and the Omega Psi Phi Mississippi organization. According to the complaint, the pledging process began in December of 2022 through April of 2023, but it was not supposed to officially begin until 2023. So already in 2022, these undergraduates were initiating hazing, violating, I presume, the organization's rules by initiating a process early. So the undergraduate chapter is Nu Eta, and it is overseen by the alumni chapter, Phi Rho chapter of Omega Psi Phi. And this is all in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And the alumni chapter was responsible for supervising the activities of Nu Eta Chapter, promulgating rules and regulations for its chapters, and enforcing those rules and regulations. They're also individually suing one of the members, who is the assistant dean of pledges, and they allege that he had been involved in prior acts of hazing. The complaint says that from the outset, the plaintiff was required to follow certain rules as an Omega Psi Phi pledge, including that he could not walk on the grass and could not be on campus too long. Plaintiff was also required to perform tasks such as giving rides to Omega members to and from campus. Sometime in December of 2022, the pledges and the Omega members met in the library to have the haze talk. And during this talk, the members explained everything that was going to happen to the pledges, including that you're going to get your ass whooped. So they told them this up front. Now, in light of this information, do you think these pledges have any responsibility for what happened to them? If they were told up front, you're going to get your ass whooped during this process. Y'all let me know what y'all think about that. What responsibility do they bear if they were told this was going to happen? So after they told them you're going to get your ass whooped, they started hazing the pledges. And this included causing sleep deprivation, intimidation, taking money and food from the pledges, threatening the pledges with physical abuse, and severely beating the pledges. According to this complaint, plaintiff was beaten numerous times by Omega members from December 2022 until April 2023, both on and off the University of Southern Mississippi's campus, with many such beatings involving the use of a 2x4 cut in the shape of a paddle. This is one of the reasons I hate paddles. I have seen sorority paddles, and I have never had a desire to have one, because to me, it just leaves a very bad taste in my mouth, because I know in the past, and apparently currently, they are used to inflict violence on people. The complaint goes on to say that as a result of continued and extreme physical abuse plaintiff endured, he had to be rushed to the emergency room on two occasions, April 14, 2023 and April 16, 2023. Notably, however, OPP members did not assist plaintiff or otherwise arrange for him to receive medical treatment on either occasion. Let's continue. As part of its history and traditions, Nu Eta Chapter promoted and engaged in an initiation ritual known as Hell Night, in which pledges were required as a condition of membership into the fraternity to allow Omega members to beat them with the wooden paddle. On April 16, 2023, as part of Hell Night, plaintiff and other pledges were blindfolded and rendered helpless before being subjected to abuse by Omega members. Thereafter, Omega members, including defendant Carter, struck plaintiff repeatedly with the wooden paddle. Following the severe beating he received on April 16, 2023, plaintiff was admitted to the emergency room and diagnosed with bruised ribs, right intramuscular hematoma, buttocks, posterior compartment syndrome, and underwent a blood transfusion and an emergency surgery. This is extreme. I mean, any type of physical hazing is extreme, but this is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, in the complaint, there are some graphic pictures of the injuries that were inflicted on this young man. So I'm going to post these pictures and so that you all can see, and I'll cover them as appropriate. But this indicates this was some serious physical abuse that was happening. Plaintiff's medical records also note that he could not walk as a result of his injuries and spent nearly 11 days in the hospital, being discharged on April 26, 2023. Upon information and belief, defendant Walls, the interim associate director of defendant's University of Southern Mississippi's Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, was aware of the hazing occurring within OPP. So this is how the liability of the university comes in. And let's face it, one of the reasons they are suing the university is because the university has deeper pockets than Omega Psi Phi. Omega Psi Phi probably has some insurance. Who knows how much it is? Maybe it's $1 million, $2 million. But the University of Mississippi has a lot more. The University of Southern Mississippi has much deeper pockets. So the complaint goes on to say, in the fall of 2022, a student pledging Omega was beaten so severely that he suffered a torn ACL and required crutches to participate in his probate ceremony. Upon information and belief, defendant USM did not investigate or otherwise address the hazing-related injuries suffered by this student. At some point during the spring of 2023, defendant Walls reached out to OPP Omega to inform them that if someone else was hurt or injured during the pledging process, Omega would be suspended. Following the plaintiff's hospitalization, defendant Walls reached out to OPP to warn them not to let plaintiff attend his probate ceremony on crutches, indicating that defendant University of Southern Mississippi didn't want to see it. Defendant Walls further indicated that if Omega allowed plaintiff to attend his probate ceremony on crutches, Omega would be suspended. You know, I am really shocked by this, if this is true. So this is a complaint. There are allegations, and the plaintiff has the burden of proving that these are true. But if the plaintiff is able to prove that what they are alleging here is in fact true, this is not only outrageous conduct by the fraternity members, but by the University of Southern Mississippi, to know that this young man was injured and was unable to even walk and was on crutches, and your response is, don't let him come to his probate. We don't want anyone to see him. That is negligent, and that's why they're being sued. But let's see, time will tell if the plaintiff is able to sustain these allegations. Despite Walls' warnings, plaintiff made a point to ensure that defendant Walls saw the condition he was in and the injuries he suffered. Now, what did Walls do at this point? You are a school official. You see that a student has been injured due to participation in a fraternity. What did he do? Or that's what I want to know. What were the next actions? Now, according to complaint, following these incidents and plaintiff's injuries, no one from the University of Southern Mississippi, including defendant Walls, reached out to plaintiff or otherwise attempted to offer him any services. Since these heinous acts, plaintiff's The complaint says that since the heinous acts, plaintiff's life has changed drastically. He could not participate in his probate, which is the coming out ceremony. He was quickly ousted from the organization and started receiving messages asking him to cover up certain details of their internal ritual process that he unfortunately had to endure. Now, why would they oust him at this point? At this point, they should have tried to keep this young man close, but they did not. And I think that there's a lot more to this story about what happened to him. The complaint goes on to say plaintiff attempted to return to USM the following semester, fall 2023. However, he was unable to walk. And due to the severe emotional distress and threats, plaintiff's grades dropped. He had to drop out of college and remove himself from that setting. This has permanently altered this young man's life. Now, he said he couldn't walk even in the fall of 2023. I wonder if those injuries remain, if they're going to be lifelong injuries. It goes on to say plaintiff sought treatment with various providers and ultimately had to relearn how to walk and adapt to never being able to fulfill his lifelong dreams of being a Southern Miss Golden Eagle alumni and an accepted member of Omega Psi Phi. So the next part of the complaint is about the University of Southern Mississippi's partnership and control over Greek life. And they go into a lot of details showing how they require the fraternities to be registered. They have rules and regulations for these fraternities that they lay out. But according to this complaint, the school made a conscious decision to withhold from current, incoming, and prospective male students and their families information about severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive incidents and dangerous hazing and harm, including coerced, excessive consumption of alcohol, and physical beatings within the University of Southern Mississippi's recognized fraternity. So they're not saying they just did this in regards to Omega Psi Phi. They're saying they did this in regards to other fraternities on their campus also. Now, in this complaint, they allege that the university treats the hazing of male students differently from how it treats the hazing of female students, and that they allow serious injuries and serious hazing to occur with male students because of gender stereotypes. And according to this complaint, that runs the serious risk of injury and death for the male students. The complaint goes on to talk about prior incidents involving fraternities, not just D9 fraternities, but they talk about what happened in 2008 with Kappa Sigma fraternity, where 2 young women had to be taken to the hospital. One had life-threatening blood alcohol level of 0.47%. They talk about what happened with USM Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity. They were suspended for failing to cooperate with a beating investigation in 2014. Phi Kappa Alpha fraternity was indefinitely suspended after an initiate in 2014. Phi Kappa Alpha fraternity was indefinitely suspended after an initiation rite led to the death of 2 flamingos. And it says that the Phi Kappa Alpha chapter was ultimately allowed to return to the campus in 2017. It says that in December of 2018, the university, in consultation with Sigma Chi International, placed the Sigma Chi fraternity on an action plan and evicted them from their house as a result of hazing violations. And then they go back to what happened in 2022 with members of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity when they beat a pledge so severely that he suffered a torn ACL and was forced to participate in his probate while on crutches. So this complaint lays out some negligence on the part of the university in supervising these undergraduates in participating in the pledge process. So what do y'all think? Do you think the university should have some liability in this? Or is it all on the individual members and the chapter? So where this complaint is going by highlighting how male undergraduates are treated by the fraternities versus what happens with the female sororities, because it does go on to say that the sororities do not have this history of hazing and abuse on this campus. Where it's going is they are going to make a claim under Title IX. Under Title IX, you can't treat undergraduates differently based on their sex. This is how they can get the university liable, and they can dig into their pockets as far as the money is concerned. And this is really terrible for Omega Psi Phi. This complaint lays out a long history of hazing within this fraternity. So they talk about an incident in 1999. A Kentucky jury found in favor of a former University of Louisville student who was badly beaten with a wood paddle. 2009, the University of Houston suspended the Omega Theta chapter of Omega Psi Phi after a pledge was beaten with paddles, a broomstick, a baseball bat, and an antenna, which resulted in the student requiring emergency medical attention. 2015, at Johnson C. Smith University, they banned the Road chapter of Omega Psi Phi from campus after a prospective member was a victim of hazing for several months. 2015, Saginaw Valley State University indefinitely suspended its Omega Psi Phi chapter after reports that a student suffered injuries after roughly a month of hazing. 2016, Louisiana State University rescinded the registration of Theta Kappa Omega chapter of Omega Psi Phi into 2019 after determining the fraternity was complicit in hazing of candidates and engaged in underground pledging process. In 2018, an initiate into a graduate chapter of Omega Psi Phi in Brooklyn, New York, was allegedly struck 200 times with a paddle and bare hands during a membership ritual. This incident required the initiate's hospitalization, highlighting the extreme and life-threatening nature of Omega Psi Phi's hazing rituals. 2019, Old Dominion University suspended the Tau Lambda chapter of Omega Psi Phi from campus for 5 years due to reports from multiple potential members that they had been pushed, shoved, and bruised by paddling or open-handed slaps during hazing activities. Fall 2022, at the University of Southern Mississippi, an initiate was beaten so severely that he required crutches. He tore his ACL during his probate. 2024, Dartmouth College suspended the Theta Beta Beta chapter of Omega Psi Phi until 2028 after a prospective member was beaten with a wooden paddle during an initiation rite for pledges. 2025, Southern University, Caleb Wilson was punched in the chest multiple times before having a seizure and falling to the ground. This is a horrible history for Omega Psi Phi. Where do they go from here? But we're going to get into what they're asking for in this complaint. So let's get into these causes of action. So this lawsuit is designed based on how the facts are laid out to make sure the University of Southern Mississippi is a plaintiff. And sometimes attorneys have to do this because the University of Southern Mississippi has the deeper pockets, but also here, the University of Southern Mississippi not only controls Omega Psi Phi fraternity, but all the fraternities on the campus. And if this is something that is widespread, the University of Southern Mississippi controls all the fraternities on the campus. And if this is something that is widespread, suing them can force them to stop the behavior, to force them to stop overlooking what these fraternities are doing. So this complaint says they are discriminating against the male students by allowing the fraternities to treat them in a more aggressive and hostile manner. What do y'all think about that? Are you buying that argument? What do you think about this idea that the sororities do not have this type of hazing problem? I don't know anything about the sororities at the University of Southern Mississippi, but I'd be surprised if the sororities are not engaging in similar behavior. But y'all let me know what you think. So the second count is also against the University of Southern Mississippi, and specifically defendant Walls, who was the administrator responsible for Greek and fraternity sorority life. And it is a violation of substantive due process rights to education and bodily integrity, and violation of the 14th Amendment. So again, this count, if they are able to prove it, would show that the administration, their representative, defendant Walls, they failed to comply with the administrative requirements of Title IX, as well as USM's Title IX and hazing policies, and that this failure deprived this former student of his substantive due process rights. Count 3 is also based on the 14th Amendment, and it is against the University of Southern Mississippi. Count 4 is against the fraternity defendants. It says that the alumni chapter failed to supervise the undergraduate chapter, that it knew of prior incidents of hazing, and so it is for negligence, that they did not appropriately supervise them. They failed in their duties to supervise these people to make sure that the pledges were safe. Count 5 is negligent infliction of emotional distress against all of the fraternity defendants. Count 6 is negligence per se against the fraternity defendants. And so with negligence per se, if you have a statute that says it is illegal for you to do certain things, and a plaintiff can show that the defendant did those things, then that's called negligence per se. Count 7 is gross negligence in how they treated this young man. 8 is against the undergraduate fraternity, the alumni fraternity, as well as unnamed individuals, and it said they conspired to conceal the illegal acts. Count 9 is a count of vicarious liability against the Omega International Chapter. That means they're saying that the Omega International Chapter had responsibility for the people in the undergraduate and also the alumni chapters, and that they failed to properly supervise those people, and therefore, because they are responsible for these damages to this young man, the national chapter is also responsible. So what is this young man seeking in this complaint? Well, the only thing you can get in a civil complaint is money damages, and that's what he's seeking. So he is seeking past and future medical expenses, including the cost of hospitalization, surgery, medication, and rehabilitation, damages for physical pain and suffering, mental anguish and emotional distress, loss of enjoyment of life, loss of educational opportunities, impaired future earnings capacity, and any other damages allowed by law. And he is requesting compensatory, which means what he actually lost out of pocket. He is also seeking punitive damages, which are the type of damages that can be imposed to prevent future bad behavior. So this could be a substantial organization-ending verdict against Omega Psi Phi. Now, this lawsuit is filed by an attorney in the state of Mississippi, as well as Pocari Sellers. So do I think Pocari Sellers wants to close down, shut down Omega Psi Phi? I don't really think he does, but I think he wants to end hazing. I think he wants to send a message with this. So y'all let me know what you think. Just based on the complaint, of course, the organization has not yet had a chance to answer the complaint, but how do you see this being resolved?